I'm very excited about the set of panelists we have speaking today. They're all longtime UX practitioners working in a wide variety of Agile contexts. I know I've worked in UX in many different Agile environments over the years and have faced a lot of different challenges trying to work in Agile and semi-Agile ways, as I'm sure all of you have. So I, for one, can't wait to hear about all of their experiences and advice. I'll start by introducing Rachel Ralph. Rachel is a career expert in learning and development with over 15 years of experience with a focus on digital media, project and production pipelines, and team leadership and curriculum. She's very passionate about digital media and its growth and value. Currently, she's supervising graduate student teams as a faculty member in product management, production pipelines, account and client management, and strategist ideas, while her great students work on a variety of digital media projects, things such as websites, mobile apps, games, working in AR, VR, MR, and so on. She also consults on curriculum, pedagogy, and learning frameworks, and she's also a certified Scrum Master. Next up, we have Rock Lung. Rock is a UX research lead at Samsung R&D Canada. He's conducted user research for a variety of companies, including SAP. He has a PhD in computer science from the University of British Columbia, specializing in human-computer interaction research. His research on improving the learnability of mobile computing devices for older adults has been published in prominent journals and conferences. Rock also actively supports the local UX community. He helped found the Radical Research Summit, an annual one-day event for UX research practitioners and supporters in the fall, and was the organizing chair for that for 2018 and 2019. He's also one of the organizers of this regular VanUE meetup. Next, we have Rob Westwood. Rob's a senior designer and educator whose passion is to help organizations solve complex problems, mature their UX practices, and realize their strongest work. He's been creating successful award-winning products and services in the e-commerce, education, and video game industries for over 13 years. He approaches design as a human-centered strategic process to build positive relationships between people and the products they use. His role is to be an ambassador for effective process, innovative solutioning, and the positive impact of design. His passion is to share and learn from others throughout this adventure while continuously evolving personally and professionally. Last but not least, we have Dave Cashman. Dave's a senior user experience designer at OXD and my colleague. OXD is an end-to-end design and technology consulting firm in Vancouver. Over the past 9 years, he's been helping guide the design of OXD solutions for our clients. This means leading research initiatives to uncover exciting opportunities to improve digital experiences and designing innovative and compelling interaction designs to help his clients realize those opportunities. Ultimately, all of this in the service of making things easier, more accessible, and enticing for the humans that use them. So that's our panel of experts. And now to get into our topic of fitting UX into an Agile world. I'd like to start by asking each of our panelists about their general experiences working with an Agile team and within the Agile process. You each come from very different contexts. We have one as a researcher, as a consultant, as a senior designer in a large team, as a faculty member. For each of these, practicing UX in Agile will look very different. So let's start with you, Rock. As a UX researcher, how does your role work within your Agile team?
Yeah, hi there. Thanks, Deb. So Samsung is a really big organization with different products and different development processes. So just allow me, if you will, just a minute just to specify sort of what I'm working on. So my group works on enterprise software. So it's a cloud services to help businesses manage and configure mobile devices. And we have maybe 10 to 12 solutions, and a lot of them are in the cloud. And our development process is definitely embraces Agile. Things are continuously evolving. There's definitely a big push from Samsung in our culture just to keep refining, keep working on things. And so we have like monthly or quarterly sprints, and we're always thinking about new features to add and to improve things. That said, while user research is very much appreciated and is valued at the company, um, we are actually, and maybe this is just my sentiment, I feel a bit like outsiders into the process. So we have PMs, UX designers, dev, QA, and others, and they have very established roles throughout the process. But user research, which is not necessarily a new department or function, I think we've been around for more than even before I was there 6 years ago. But we we haven't found a way of putting research in consistently in the agile process that we use. And so the way I typically work is ad hoc requests, usually usability testing on major design features, and that would require just working with the stakeholder who I'm close to and who knows how UX can fit in. And then I also have initiatives in parallel.
Why
We're
can you
working
join? I cannot join.
And because you are not in agile.
Yeah, I'm not.
And we might have to do initiatives in parallel to try to keep ahead of the decisions that are being made so that when they are made, we have the insights there for them. So I'll leave it there for now. I know there'll be other questions and I can elaborate further.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Let's move on to Dave. Dave, how do you work with the agile process in the consulting world?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the project, which is the nature of consulting. So for example, right now I'm working on a larger multi-year government project it's quite agile in the way that we work. It's over several years, so we really get to evolve a product over time. And so that one's very, very agile. And then at the same time, for a different client, I'm doing I'm leading a research engagement, and it's not agile, it's just going through that aspect of it. So we kind of jump in and out depending on the project and the need. So for that larger government client, so we have our team, so myself and a project manager, plus our 2 backend developers, we have a QA, we have a visual designer, and we have a front-end developer. And then on the client side, we'll have a business analyst as well as our product owner who takes over. They'll have the final say on what to move forward, and as well they'll communicate up throughout the government ministry to involve who needs to be involved on decisions and work up through the RACI. And so, yeah, like as part of that, we follow a lot of the kind of scrum ceremonies. So we have our stand-ups, a mixture of offline and online ones where we're all chatting on our Zoom meeting. We'll have our weekly client status meeting as more kind of rhythms. We'll do our 2-week sprints and keep everything in Confluence and Jira. Confluence for requirements, Jira for all of our user stories and our bug tracking and planning out our sprints, as well as tools like Miro in order to do things like user story mapping and a lot of the strategy work and research analysis.
All right, thanks, Dave. Next, let's go to Rob. You're working in Agile at a large scale. So can you tell us, how does that work with your team at Best Buy?
Yeah, thanks, Deb. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining tonight. So I'm coming from the Best Buy lens, and obviously it's a super large organization. And really the goal of Best Buy is to help people enrich their lives through technology. And our users are Canadian customers, so both new and returning. So it's a really, really wide user base. And when we think of like the customer's journey and their experience with Best Buy, there's a multitude of different groups who are working on the product experience that makes up that journey. And so you might be involved in multiple groups or teams, or you might be just involved in one as part of being in a design role. Your accountabilities are going to change, but at the end of the day, everybody's there to be an ambassador for what good looks like for good design process and demonstrating the value of design. And then integrating with Agile teams is a really important part of that, obviously. So again, we have Agile teams that are really grouped around serving different customer goals, depending on where they are in their journey. Those teams primarily operate in a Scrum fashion. And because it's again such a large organization, good communication is really what success hinges on. And so that's something we're actively always trying to get better at. And design is very much like it's horizontal across the organization. So it means it's very fast paced, and it's chiefly focused on the most important problems that are facing our users as well as the business. So there's really never a dull moment. And we have dedicated practice leads that are really there to help designers integrate well and really act as, again, good ambassadors for design and partner with their colleagues in these agile teams because it is such a fast-paced environment. So there's good guidance on practice and processes and the different design mechanisms that you can employ in that environment. And yeah, it's very much, even though it's a big organization, it's agile in both name and practice. And so we are operating on, we have sprint deliverables and we iterate and fail fast, and it tends to work pretty well. So I'll stop there and pass it back to you, Deb.
Thanks. Yeah. So on that topic of ambassadors who really help you kind of figure out that agile process and help propagate that throughout your teams, Rachel, right, who is a Scrum Master, who actually does teach agile processes and frameworks. Can you tell us about how agile and the UX working process manifests in your academic environment?
Yeah, I think for some people, thinking of agile in academic space doesn't always sound like they go together. And I think that's what makes the Center for Digital Media a little unique, in the sense that we really focus on those practical skills in agile development. We use agile methodologies, mostly Scrum, some Kanban, some XP, depends on some lean thinking. And so it kind of just depends on the project, but it's what we're training our students in doing to become professionals in this space. And so applying all of the ceremonies, all of the techniques, rapid iterative processes, adaptations, all the kind of what everybody said for their pieces, we are training students essentially to do that and take on that role, and to really become agile leaders in the space and agile, excited. At the same time, there's a bit of reality that some of them aren't going to go work in a completely agile framework place, and so we call it a little bit more watergile, where some parts are a little bit more waterfall, also because there are deadlines for school. We can't iterate forever, and so we have to change some things depending on the different circumstances. But it's a great opportunity to learn these before you go into that space.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for that little peek into each of your worlds and how you're approaching Agile. One thing I really wanted to dive into today was the idea of roles. Often as UX practitioners, we wear a lot of different hats within an Agile team. And I'd really like to hear from some of you about how regimented the roles are within your organization and within your teams. How you work together with your team, how are the responsibilities split out, and where is there crossover in those responsibilities? I'm going to start with you, Rachel, because I believe that at CDM, you're very much on the flexible side of the spectrum in the project teams that you work with there, and I'd love to hear about that. Yeah,
so we definitely embrace more of a Scrum team size, so less than 10. Most of our project teams are 5 to 7 people, often with a product owner, a Scrum Master, and then developers and artists kind of mixed in. But because the teams are so small, sometimes people have to wear multiple hats. So sometimes we'll have a UX UI designer who might be a project lead, or a developer who's also an artist. So we really embrace the interdisciplinary team. You have your primary role, but also a secondary role. And that's important. It's especially, I think, been highlighted, the importance of that in during COVID times, when people have gotten sick, to not let projects fall to the side and somebody else can pick up some part of it. Maybe not to the level of, say, somebody skills that they have, but enough to keep the project moving forward in some sort of way. And so finding that multidisciplinary team really, really helps in that situation.
Thanks. So I'm going to pass to Rock now, because I think you might be on the other side of that spectrum, maybe working a little bit less synchronously with the Agile teams, but please tell us about that.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, on the other end of the spectrum, so at least for the product team itself, we have very defined teams like UX, Dev, QA, you have the product managers and even the project managers. And we rarely change a hat, so it's very obvious what your role is there, but you'll be brought on to a particular project and sprint. So yeah, it might be because it's a larger team and there's more specialization. So even on my UX team, you know, the designers are separate from the researchers. So we have full-time researchers. But I guess in terms of, and I mentioned this for research, you know, we also have a specific role of doing research. It's not particularly integrated into the Agile process, but I think it's well understood what we can, I guess what we can do. It's just a matter of finding the time and coordinating with us, and that's what we're currently working on. And so I think it's the role is established. It's just where we fit into the process isn't.
Yeah. So we sort of have a bit of both ends of the spectrum there. Now I'm going to call on Dave, because I think in your consulting world, you probably touch on both ends and everything in the middle.
Yeah, I actually wear quite a lot of hats on sort of the larger project I'm on right now. So I'm, you know, primarily I have the UX design, and I describe it as being able to look from both the lens of the forest and the trees. And that actually ticks a lot of boxes for me. So I really enjoy that larger strategic lens to kind of plan where the project is going longer term, and seeing how all of those different trees kind of like work together to make that forest so grand, to go with this metaphor. And so in that aspect, that's where sort of a bit more I dip my toe into a bit of, I guess, product management would be the role name for that. And I share that role with the client side, as ultimately they're the owner and they have the final say, but we work really closely together from that strategic level. And then we also dip into the individual trees, so getting into more detailed product design as well. And I'm also documenting those requirements to Confluence. And so I'm also wearing that BA hat at the same time, as well as the UX design hat. And then I also get into some of the research as well, as each year goes in this larger project. We're getting out there to talk to our users and learn more about these larger sections of the system that we're actually adding in, and these different kind of use cases that or different kind of departments or different types of products that we're going to be adding in. And so I'm kind of managing all of that together, which has a lot of perks for me because I get my hands in a lot of things, but it can have the downside of being a bit of a bottleneck. And because that's a lot of different things, but it's enjoyable and it's manageable.
Nice. So I'm kind of hearing that some teams are maybe a little bit more regimented than others, you know, some difference in roles, but I also wonder if this speaks somewhat to the differing levels of UX maturity and adoption within a company. So I'm going to pass to Rob for this one. And I'd like to ask, how does your company's UX maturity impact your ways of working and your team structures? Is a more mature company more likely to have Agile and UX integrated?
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes. That's my gut reaction to that question. If you're not operating in some form of Agile methodology, then it does raise some eyebrows in this day and age. If you're operating in a waterfall mechanism, then there's some questions there to be asked. But at Best Buy, really on the product side, because it's horizontal in terms of its structure, as a design practitioner, you're focused on, again, the highest priority problems. And because it's horizontal, you might be operating being, and you might be embedded with different teams throughout your tenure. And what stays the same is that everybody's expected to show up as a leader. So that's one of the sort of the key components of our experience design maturity. We have some very well understood fundamental values that go behind, really enrich anything that we're working on. So we try and be human in everything that we're both creating for our users and also how we talk to each other. Really be as centric to our users as much as possible. So understanding and really evaluating the wants and needs of who it is that we're catering to and understanding the why behind it. That's been part of our UX maturity process and getting it further along. And you're really, at Best Buy, it's really tied, there's a close integration with very diverse Scrum teams. So while the design community is quite mature in its processes and practices, you may be operating with people who are new to the organization who might not have had the benefit of that in their past experience, whether they're a designer or not. So going back to everybody's expected to show up as a leader, part of that expectation is being able to help bring people along with that journey. And so, you might, if you are your colleagues on the development side do not understand what experience design is, or maybe what the differences are between user experience and user interface, it is part of your role and accountabilities to help them understand that and appreciate that, as well as the processes that you employ to do good work, because ultimately it's going to help them do good work. And yeah, there's a larger community of practice that all the design practitioners are a part of, and that community practice is a great way to continue that maturing of our UX values and mechanisms. It's a way that we can share and learn from both our leadership and one another, share our wins and failures that we're learning from. And it's something that is really instrumental for everybody to move ahead and sort of mature themselves as a professional discipline, and help each person individually improve their skill set. So that's something that's really paramount. As designers, we want to continuously be sharpening that axe.
Thanks, Rob. Rob, can I call on you for potentially a different perspective?
Yeah, so I would say that to answer your question, yes, I believe that the UX maturity definitely would inform how well UX is integrated in the Agile process. From what I've seen working at Samsung, it's very much a strong technology-centered company. A lot of our technologies are technology-driven, engineering-driven, and so I think while UX is very much valued, I think that there's still quite a ways to go in terms of trying to have UX be considered earlier and be more part of the process and inform sort of the developments that are happening. And so right now, I think really it's, I guess, our team is very much, and the larger UX team is really looking at a culture shift towards being moving away from being reactive and just designing how how a feature is implemented, to being more involved in the strategy and looking at what features are the most important, what do people most need. And it's definitely a work in progress. We've made a lot of progress of late, but yeah, I think the next thing we're really working on is how to get research better integrated. And that there's a lot of just doing proof of concepts, showing the value, demonstrating that it can work, and educating the rest of the development team, the product development team, to show that this is a better way of doing things, in our opinion.
Thanks. Continuing on with this idea of UX maturity, I guess there's, you've both talked a little bit about maturity within a team, within individuals, that you can help grow and develop. But for those of us who work with clients or stakeholders that are a little more outside of our sphere of influence, we often have much less control over these practices and their understanding. So I'm going to put to Rachel and then to Dave. How do you engage with stakeholders that aren't used to working in an agile way? You can start us off there, Rachel.
Sure. Yeah, we have a lot of variety in the types of stakeholders that come our way, and some totally understand Agile or think they understand Agile or don't understand Agile at all. So every experience is slightly different with the team, and often our teams are brand new teams. So they aren't necessarily mature teams either that have been working together for a long time. They're brand new. And so, yeah, some of the challenges is a bit of an education piece, I would say, but coming in myself as a certified Scrum Master, I can help educate. I become, the Scrum champion, which is a little bit of what you do when you're the Agile person. You might have to be the person championing behind it. But it can be challenging at times because it's natural for some people to fall into that waterfall way of working or the way they've always been working. I think some of the interesting pieces is we also are dealing with kind of like a lot of next level technology. So especially AR, VR, we're doing stuff in the metaverse already. We are doing volumetric capture and like all of these different types of technology that really don't have maybe a traditional pipeline that exists. And so it's a little bit easier to be agile and iterative because it's a little bit of the wild, wild west in some of these cases. And we have to be that way because I was currently working on a web AR project, and web AR technology actually isn't ready for the type of stuff we are doing. And we had to pull it all out of web AR and put it back into an AR kit through like an iOS test flight thing. So we have to be completely adaptive, and we try and tell our clients and stakeholders before they come in, as much as we are doing this, that it will be a prototype proof of concept option. But sometimes clients value or don't value certain things. I've had teams in the past where the client completely did not value any user experience information, any user experience testing. They said, no, that's not worth our time. We don't really care about the users. And it's like, I'm also supposed to be educating the students on the importance of this. And we all know the importance of that. But when the client is telling them, don't worry about it, it's a very challenging situation. So sometimes there's an education piece for our stakeholders as much as the students in that sense.
Dave, how about you?
Yeah, no, definitely. And the Watergile thing, I hadn't known that was used outside of like my company. So it was funny hearing that term. I found it so funny when we hear about it. But yeah, as for consulting, we always have our deadlines, just like every project has a start and an end time. It doesn't kind of continue on after that. So we do have to plan, and that's where we work in Watergile quite a bit. And the learning that comes from clients that are very used to, and a lot of our government clients are very used to these larger waterfall engagements that are over several years where everything is kind of planned and very regimented. And especially when, so the one big example was, it was about a 16-month project. And I think it took about 9 months of consistent messaging and education in order for the client to finally start recognizing sort of that, what I guess the decisions that we had been communicating about and the consequences of those communications. So for example, there's that classic agile triangle of cost and effort and scope. And it's like, pick two. I think that's straight out of like Scrum Master training. A colleague of ours like took that and had that back, and that's really stuck with me. But often the waterfall, the clients that are very used to waterfall, kind of, they always get all three. And then it's the kind of the vendor that might have to take on more, us being that kind of situation to make sure we deliver what they ask for, or there's change requests and all that sort of thing. And so to kind of shift that thinking to be like, okay, if you want this, what can you give up? Is there something that scope wise that maybe you can deliver after, and then you can get this other thing that you really want, and it becomes that negotiation, but it takes a long time and a lot of education. And even my current one, it's probably taken at least a year or two, again, because of that waterfall type of mindset, to just shift that to more the benefits of Agile and what that give and take actually allows you to accomplish. So it takes time.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, one more question, and I'm going to put this one towards you, Rob. Kind of moving a little bit on in our process. When you're working in an Agile process, how do you go about understanding what good looks like? What are you measuring? What are you doing with those measurements?
Yeah, and that's really like the question, is what does good look like? Regardless of where you're working, there's some fundamental questions that we try and answer through our design process. And primarily, what's the problem that you're trying to solve, and what's the why behind it? And if you can't articulate that, that's a full stop, right? So, and once you understand what that problem is, how is it impacting your users? How is it showing up? Is it causing friction? Is it causing churn? Is it causing confusion? These are things that are going to have an impact on what those metrics or KPIs or what those measurements actually are. Do you actually understand the wants and needs of your users? And at the same time, what about on the organizational side? So it's one thing to be solving problems for your users. It's another thing to be solving the intersection of those needs with the needs of the business or the organization that you're a part of. So understanding the internal expectations are important pillars of being able to answer what good looks like. The actual measurement mechanisms that you're using for any of the user researchers on the call, this will be really close to your near and dear to you, is what methodologies are you using? What qualitative or quantitative methods are actually helping you identify and then track the impact or measure the impact of your work against specific KPIs? Another thing that we look at a lot is who else has tackled a problem space. Are you reinventing a wheel that needs to be reinvented? Or can you leverage from the good work that someone else has done and improve it for the next iteration? That's going to help you right size your time and energy within that problem space. And then thinking about like, how do you communicate the value of what it is you're working on is really important. So business value and experience design value are very much part and parcel with each other, but it's another thing to articulate it to a group of stakeholders who may not understand what design is to begin with. And so that's an important thing that's going to go into how you are defining what good looks like. The last thing that I would say here is understanding internally what has worked well for you, both as an individual contributor or as someone managing a team of folks, what's working well for you. And then what is the internal expectation of what good looks like within your organization? Because it's going to be a little bit or very different depending on where you go in terms of here's where the bar is set. And this is what the expectations are actually defined as. Whether that's actually spoken or not is another thing. I see that Rachel's hand is up, so I'll ask her to add on to this or ask a further question.
Yeah, I want to add on to that too, because I think that's a really good overview, and I think those are key components. And one part in terms of like the Scrum, like Agile way that they define it is that definition of done versus good, perhaps. And the definition of done does have like functional requirements and acceptance criteria, quality, like the qualitative stuff, and then also non-functioning requirements, because there's some components that we need done that aren't like the functioning part. But I think the key part is for the entire team to understand what the definition of done is, because that helps you move on and not get stuck in that what people think actually is happening in Agile, that we just sit and work on the same problem over and over and over without moving on and launching anything. But once we get to that definition of done, then we can actually continue being iterative and grow. So I just wanted to add on to that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And understanding what your desired end state is versus what your definition of done might be in the sprint to sprint that you're operating within is really, really important, because that's going to serve as your flag in the sand that everybody's ideally moving towards. And that definition of done that Rachel spoke to is really critical to know, hey, are we on track to get there or not?
Yeah.
Great point.
I saw you thumbs upping there. Do you have anything to add? Is that a me too?
Yeah, just so we've been using kind of that more high level version of like acceptance criteria called like conditions of satisfaction, which is more from that higher scope level. And I know that when it's done, when there's a whole bunch of things to accomplish. So sometimes like we'll get to a certain point, there might be some nice to haves that are in those conditions of satisfaction that we can't get to. So then at that point, communication between the dev team and myself will happen, and then we'll spin that off into another story that then we can prioritize later for a future release. So yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
And Rob, to put you on the spot too, I'm curious whether your team and your role as UX research gets brought in as part of measuring that, whether something has reached its definition of done and measuring against those specific KPIs.
Yeah, I guess the short answer is no, but I think there's a recognition, especially from the UX team. I mean, I think there's in terms of functional requirements, I think that though there are clear it's very clear sort of when that's done or not. But I think on the usability side and usefulness and things like that, more sort of UX metrics that we're familiar with. Yeah, those aren't spelled out as explicitly as we'd like.
I see also a great comment from Ashay in the chat. If it's definition of done, why isn't it condition of content? That's great. All right, so perfect. I'm seeing some questions kind of starting to come in, ready to start putting our panelists on the spot with some audience questions. So our first one from Veronica, feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask, otherwise I will ask it for you. I'll go ahead. If you could add one more principle to the Agile Manifesto, what principle would you put forward? Somebody, that's a really great, interesting question. If you were the one writing it, if you get to add something in there, what would you like to add to the manifesto?
It's funny because for me in the manifesto, I know like there's the 12 principles and then, the key statements, this over this, this over this. And I actually have a challenge with, working software over comprehensive documentation. I don't think they should be mutually exclusive. And I think that's another perhaps misunderstanding of how the Agile Manifesto. I think we need to really understand like these are the important things, but don't forget these things either. And I think sometimes people say like, well, worry about the individual interactions and forget the process and tools. But especially as somebody who, and I think the rest of the panel here can agree, like as user research designers, those are sometimes really, really, really important. And I don't know what I would add. I have to think about that for a second because there's a lot of good ones. I have ones maybe I would change or tweak, but I know what I would add. Maybe I'll throw it to everybody else.
We'll go to our next audience question. We've got a whole bunch of them coming up in the chat here. Jane, did you want to unmute and ask your question? Or if not, I'll ask it for you.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if your teams are doing documentation. I feel like I've been in some Agile teams where they take everything very strictly and they don't want documentation done, but then the developers are like, well, I don't know what to build. So I'd be interested to hear how documentation fits in and when it's getting done within the sprint, if it's getting done before the sprint starts, during the sprint, how that works.
Rob, do you maybe want to take a crack at that one?
Yeah, sure. I was furiously typing in the chat, but I realized this is probably better. So I think going to the question of design artifacts, great question. And it really depends on a few things: the scope of the problem, the complexity of it, who the audience is internally that you're catering to. There's definitely some tried and true artifacts that we're creating. So yes, wireframes are from the user experience side, part of our bread and butter, which is going to inform more of a pixel perfect user interface and interaction design side of things. Those artifacts, depending on, again, the complexity, so how unknown it is, and the complications, so literally how many moving pieces are there that the problem that you're trying to solve actually creates, is going to dictate how much, what does the handoff or translation of that work actually look like to your development team, so that they understand what it is that you're trying to solve and understand sort of like the critical path to get there. So without being too hand wavy about it, it really depends on the scope of the problem, but there are key things that we really index on. And going to Finn's question about, oh, maybe actually I'm jumping ahead, so I'll pass it back to you here, Deb.
I was going to say, Dave, I think would like to put an answer to Jane's question as well.
Yeah, just for our project, I mean, this is sort of quoting one of the guys big in the Agile space that I took a course from, Mike Cohn, and it's kind of like trying to find with your team that sort of that sweet spot of like delivering. If you're overwriting documentation, that's too much. If you're underwriting and the devs don't know what to build, then that's not enough. So it's trying to find that middle ground. And for us on the big project that I'm on right now, it is a combination of having like a wireframe or a light prototype that speaks through some of the interactions. Then we have our Confluence page, which kind of goes to define some of the fields and goes to get into some validation criteria and closer to some acceptance criteria. But it's definitely, we're a bit more on the heavy documentation side than just having the sole acceptance criteria in a story and then that being where the documentation is and the working code being the documentation. So we're kind of a bit more on the have that solid set of documentation, and QA really enjoys that because they have a solid set of requirements to test. The devs really enjoy that because they'll have visual mockups plus a prototype if appropriate, as well as a single set of requirements that they can look at and refer to. And so that seems to be the sweet spot for my current project with that.
Before we move on to Finn's question, Rachel, I see you've kind of thought of an additional response to the one around the Agile Manifesto. For those who aren't watching the chat, do you want to speak about that one?
Yeah, sure. So, one thing that I noticed is that there's nothing about diversity, diverse perspectives, diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences. Like there's a bit of that missing, I feel, in the Agile Manifesto. I know it's about bringing motivated individuals and it focuses on that, but I think diverse experiences and backgrounds are important. And I think whatever, and this is something I'm trying to highlight to everybody, whatever your experience is, even if you were, I had a student who was a fishing boat captain and led people in up by Haida Gwaii, but all of those skills really actually played into him managing a team because he had to, do something in that. And so not shying away from these perspectives and backgrounds and experiences. And I feel that's something the Agile Manifesto doesn't talk about a lot. And I think that can really impact the success of a team and thinking about things outside of a box. I guess that's what I want to add.
It's great. I'll echo Rob's about plus 1,000%. Yes, agreed. Okay, we've started to touch on this one a little bit, I think, in the chat. But Finn, did you want to unmute and ask your question, or I will ask it for you?
Hey, yeah, sure. Thanks. So yeah, basically, on the topic of trying to solicit buy-in from stakeholders, I think it's a bit of a catch-22 where it can be really difficult to get ahead and have all of the analytic hooks you actually need to start to measure the impacts of your design. So, on the one hand, you're kind of hand in hat asking for access to technical resources to start to track some of those changes as you introduce new features based on what you assume the changes are going to be. So my question is really about, how do you kind of like break that cycle of, maybe kind of chasing your own tail or trying to read the tea leaves to understand the impact of your design by kind of getting that support from stakeholders. What do you try to show them? And as a backup to that, or not alternative to that, in the absence of like hard data, what are some KPIs that you can kind of use to gauge the impact of your design?
So Rob, I know you'd started to type an answer to that one.
Yeah, and I think it's a really key question that Finn's asked, and it's honestly a very hard question to answer, both for myself and many folks. Like how do you translate the value of what it is that you're doing into sort of tangible results? And I think a lot of it is going to come down to understanding the problems that are perceived internally with your stakeholders, and then really getting to the root of those problems and understanding the why behind them. And there's going to be fundamental experience design problems that are driving the why there. And that's where you can start to build that connective tissue with your stakeholders, with people who maybe are not designers, but you are accountable to in terms of the value that you bring to the organization. And so finding that common ground is really important. And also at the same time, recognizing that this is a really challenging question to answer most of the time. And so it's a good opportunity to collaborate with your peers and get honest feedback from people who you trust, to be like, hey, this is how I'm translating the value of what it is that I'm intending to do. Does it stick against the wall, right? So yeah, really, really important question that Finn's asked.
Yeah. Rachel, I saw you doing a thumbs up there. Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think all of that is true. It can be challenging sometimes when the clients think they are the users. And that can happen sometimes. And they're like, well, I'm the user group, so just test it with me. But something that I always encourage, or something like, I want my users to, and this kind of goes maybe with some of the A/B testing, that maybe there's clear problems you couldn't fix. You want your users to break it. I want my users to find the holes, to find the problems, to find, something that I didn't even realize, because we get really close to it and they can come in and I want them to destroy the thing that I'm like, I didn't even think it could do that. And so for me, that's a learning experience, and there's a lot of value in that. I think letting the clients know that and stakeholders know that, and yes, you might be the user, but let's also test with other users. You got to do it in a kind and gentle nudging way.
Getting back to our earlier discussions around documentation and when documentation is done, Winnie has a question around that. Oh, sorry, Rock, you were wanting to respond. Sorry, I missed your hands up there.
Yeah, no worries. I just wanted to follow up, echoing what Rob said about the KPIs, in that it is collaborative. I think that, I definitely take Finn's point in terms of that certain metrics are hard to collect, and you might need stakeholders' involvement and resources to be able to collect that. But I'm also of the mind that there's a lot of data that you can collect, and not everybody cares about a lot of it. And I think it's really important to really find the one or two, or the small set that the team cares about, and oftentimes it's a product manager, to see like what does, to talk to what we talked about in the past, what does good look like, what are we aiming for, and how does a KPI map to that? And I think it's going to be different for each product, for each organization, for each product team. And so it's really collaborative to see what people really care about, and especially the product owners.
Rock, I'll get you to stay on deck, because I think you probably will have an answer to this next audience question. Winnie, did you want to unmute and ask your question, or shall I ask it for you?
Sure, I can pose the question. Thank you, Deb. I was just curious, since we were talking about documentation earlier and when that's done in the project and the process, in terms of research, I'm curious how the panelists here have sort of infused that within their Agile processes, and how they've shared that with the rest of the team, and how that's impacted the design decisions or the development decisions later on down the road.
Yeah, so research, a lot of it is socializing. And so as I mentioned, we don't, like our agile processes don't have a nice place for research to sort of documents to fit into. So really our strategy is to make our research findings really accessible to all the decision makers. So research repository, we're using Confluence wiki pages a lot, but we're also, when we find something, we're trying to pull in people. We're having our stakeholders, designers, PMs attend our usability sessions. And so yeah, I don't know if it fits neatly in the Agile process, but we're really trying to help remind them of things, share our insights, be present during workshops to provide those insights when they're making the decisions. Does that answer your question?
Great, thank you, Rock.
Yeah, thanks, Winnie.
Just because it's very related to this question and what we just said, we had another question further down in the chat around, are any of you using innovative ways of communicating, and what are your best tips for improving communication with the team beyond Zoom and Slack?
Yeah, I can jump in because we use all the tools. I have all the things. This screen is full over here. You can't see it. I'm experimenting with every single possible tool there is, from Slack to Mattermost to Teams to Google Meet to Discord, just for those, and Trello and Jira and Asana and Monday.com and all of the things you can think of. We do here. I teach here. And I think for me, I'm super adaptive. I'll try them all. I think you have to figure out, some places it depends what your company is doing. There might be a proprietary software, so you lean into that. Sometimes it's more experimental per the team. I know some of my teams use Miro exclusively or Notion exclusively, and then just jump onto Zoom for the quick calls. I actually have been using Discord more often because it was actually a lot quicker, better connection on their end to use that. So, and then we do projects also in Unreal and Unity, and sometimes streaming those don't work well over Zoom, and Discord actually is better software for that. So it really depends on what you're using. I'm going to use a second to actually plug my course. I'm actually going to be teaching a micro-credential in leadership and agile production management, and in particular focusing on remote and hybrid office learning styles. So anyone who's interested in this intro course, it's for 6 weeks starting in May. I'll post the link in the chat, but we'll be talking a lot about those practices.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've definitely got time for probably one more question here. Gina, you had a question about rushing to testing. Did you want to unmute and ask it?
Sure, I'm just curious how you deal with people, the developers and the testing community that just want to just jump right into testing without first let's make something that's going to be useful, that people are going to look at and have a good experience with. Like, it's definitely not the end product, but sometimes I find people get hung up on obvious errors that you were going to fix anyway, and then that's all you hear the feedback on, and so you miss out on kind of that more deeper learning that you could have had you taken that time to fix those products or those those errors there. Any thoughts on that?
Rob, I know you started to answer that one in the chat. Well, you answered it with another question. Do you want to bring that up?
I'll be honest, I was answering another question in the chat, so I only caught the tail end of the question. What was it again?
So this was Gina's question around how are you managing people who are trying to rush to test?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, the right type of testing is always the most important thing. Some testing is better than no testing, but there's a time and place for different types of testing. And so, if we're solving a design problem based off of, a non-complex problem space, so we're solving something for our organization that other organizations have solved, then we might not need to do that really high effort A/B test. And we can really rely on our design best practices and principles, what our external resources say is what good looks like. So we look at a lot of Nielsen Norman Group stuff to help us define what good looks like internally. And then we might run in a more guerrilla type test suite. And so we might run, a 5-person usability test to ensure that, hey, what we're putting forward, we are fully confident in that. And so that's a lot faster turnaround to do that in something like a 1 or 2 week sprint than it is to collaborate with a DI team and push out a 10,000 sample group A/B test. Now, there's definitely times and places to do that, though. So I think it really depends on the scope and the complexity of your problem. That's going to really help you guide what kind of testing you're doing. In terms of people actually trying to rush to testing, that it's the same principle applies. It's a question of, okay, so why do you want to do this testing, right? And they might not be aware that there are other mechanisms that are actually much more effective to get them to the same sort of caliber of confidence in what it is that you're working on.
Yeah, I wanted to add on to that, really it's for testing, there's a return on investment. And so what I'm hearing here is that that there might be just some obvious usability issues, and the test is unveiling that, but you actually want them to go deeper. And so there's a spectrum of testing methods, ranging from very discount. You have a review which can help to, like internal review, which would help to catch a lot of these these obvious problems. And then there's something much that takes a lot more effort, but you're actually talking to the users. You're going deep. You actually you've covered all the obvious usability issues and fixed them, and then now you really want them to get into sort of how useful it is and how they're going to use it. So I guess I would echo what Rob said in that, like, it's really important to find the method that's appropriate for that, for what you're looking for, and try to use sort of lower cost testing methods to figure out and fix those usability issues, and then spend more time if you need to go and do a more in-depth comprehensive testing session.
All right. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for questions today. However, I do know that each of our panelists is quite happy for everyone attending. If you want to reach out to them on LinkedIn and connect and continue the conversation or ask any further questions, I know they have a lot of advice to give, and we would all be very happy to connect with you. But other than that, thank you all so much for coming in, and thank you to our panelists. This has been just a fascinating and wonderful discussion, and some great tips and great insights into all the really different ways of working, and how that's all going. So thanks very much. I hope everybody can go and enjoy a little bit of this amazingly gorgeous day. The sun is still out, so give everybody a chance to go and bask in that a little bit.
And thanks, Deb, for facilitating a great chat. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining. Thanks for having us.
Thanks all.
Thank
Bye.
Thanks for
you.
listening.